The air in the women's locker room at Gold's Gym in Venice Beach, CA, was heavy and humid, saturated with the pungent smell of chlorine and the metallic scent of sweat. Karine, 32, a gym instructor with a body sculpted by years of discipline and a sharp mind honed by her experience as a former Olympic gymnast, felt the sweat trickle down her forehead, mixing with the water from her recent shower. It was almost 11 at night, and the usual daytime buzz of the gym had given way to an almost sepulchral silence, broken only by the distant hum of air conditioning compressors and the occasional drip from a poorly closed faucet. She was alone, the last one out, as usual, mentally reviewing the next day's class. Her eyes, accustomed to observing every movement and imperfection in her students' workouts, swept across the empty locker room, reflected in the fogged mirror. The image was distorted, almost ghostly, with the metal lockers lined up like silent sentinels and the dark wooden benches appearing even more ominous in the gloom. Suddenly, a subtle movement in the corner of the mirror caught her attention. It wasn't a reflection, but something within it. In the background of the image, where the free weights area was located, the weight plates on a leg press machine, which should have been stationary, began to sway. A slow, almost imperceptible sway at first, but it quickly gained rhythm, as if an invisible force were propelling them. An icy chill ran down Karine's spine, creeping up her neck and making the hairs on her arms stand on end. She felt a shiver that didn't come from the air conditioning, but from a primordial terror. Her eyes, initially focused on the swaying plates, widened as she saw something even more disturbing. Right behind her own image in the reflection, a heavy Olympic bar materialized. It wasn't on the floor, nor resting on a rack. It was suspended in the air, mere inches from her head, swaying menacingly, like a deadly pendulum, ready to drop at any moment. The cold metal of the bar, even in the reflection, seemed to exude an aura of imminent danger. Karine spun around abruptly, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs, the sound of her own gasping breath echoing in the silence. But there was nothing, only the emptiness of the locker room, the lockers, the benches. The bar wasn't there. The weight plates on the leg press were still. The smell of chlorine seemed stronger, almost suffocating. She touched the spot where the bar had appeared, feeling only cold air. The premonition was icy, undeniable. Her students, one by one, had been dying in brutal, inexplicable accidents outside the gym. And now, the mirror, a portal to a dark truth, showed her own end. A feeling of helplessness and terror washed over her, mixed with the certainty that she was next. The salty Pacific breeze, which usually brought a welcome relief to the Los Angeles heat, now seemed to carry an invisible weight, suffocating Karine. Ever since Mark, her CrossFit student, was crushed by a runaway truck on the Pacific Coast Highway, the premonition in the mirror hadn't left her. The image of the swaying bar in her mind was a constant torment, a chilling reminder of life's fragility and the imminence of tragedy. In her small Santa Monica home, a charming cottage with wooden walls and a small garden, but now dark and oppressive, she tried to push away the visions, but they clung to her like a second skin. She touched her forehead, feeling a cold sweat, despite the mild night temperature. "It's not possible," she murmured to herself, her voice hoarse, almost inaudible. She turned on all the lights in the living room, breaking the gloom that seemed to have settled in her soul. The yellow glow of the lamps tried, in vain, to dispel the darkness that enveloped her. At the gym the next day, the atmosphere was one of mourning and consternation. The usual hum of workouts was muffled, and smiles were scarce. Sarah, 28, the Gold's Gym receptionist, with her bright blonde hair and usually vibrant smile, now had swollen red eyes. She wiped down the counter with a damp cloth, her movements slow and mechanical, avoiding Karine's gaze. The smell of disinfectant and sweat seemed stronger, almost nauseating. "Did you hear the news about Jess?" Sarah asked, her voice choked, almost a whisper. Karine felt a knot tighten in her throat, a painful premonition. Jessica, her most dedicated student, a young woman full of life and plans, had been found dead after falling from scaffolding at a construction site in the city. She was so excited about the new building. Sarah continued, tears streaming down her face. Karine merely nodded, her mind racing, trying to process the information, but already with the cruel certainty. She knew. She knew these weren't isolated accidents. There was a connection, a dark force at work. That night, the silence of Karine's house was broken only by the wind howling in the street, rattling the window blinds. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of student files, searching for a connection, a pattern that could explain the inexplicable. Mark, Jess, and now, the news of Greg's accident, a bodybuilder who trained with her, known for his brute strength and determination. He had died in a car accident, crashing into a pole on a deserted street. All the accidents seemed to have a strange link to their workouts, to strength, to physique, to the limits of the human body. A sense of urgency dominated her, a growing desperation. She had to warn them, but how? How could she explain a premonition in the mirror without seeming completely insane? The smell of something burning that seemed to come from the kitchen pulled her from her thoughts. It was just the coffee she had forgotten on the stove, bubbling and overflowing. But the fright, the acrid smell, reminded her of life's fragility, of the imminent danger that seemed to haunt them. Each death was an echo, a warning, one more step towards her own destiny. The hot, relentless Los Angeles sun, which usually invigorated her with its vibrant energy, now seemed to suffocate her like a heavy, invisible blanket. Karine felt the tension in every muscle of her body as she led the spinning class. The room, filled with energy and sweat, felt like a stage where each student on their bike was a potential target, a piece in a macabre game. Her eyes, once focused on guiding the pace and intensity, now incessantly scanned the environment, searching for any anomaly, any sign of danger. The bike chains whirring in unison, sweat dripping from concentrated faces, the air conditioning humming in a constant rhythm. Everything seemed too normal, a deceptive facade. But she felt the presence of danger, like a creeping, imperceptible perfume, seeping into every corner of the gym. As she instructed the group, her voice firm and professional, her eyes fixed on Alex, one of her youngest students, an aspiring athlete with a promising future. He pedaled vigorously, his face flushed with effort, but his bike chain seemed looser than normal, producing an irregular metallic clanking sound. An icy shiver ran through Karine. The premonition wasn't as clear as the others, but the image of the chain breaking and Alex losing control, falling violently, formed in her mind with terrifying clarity. "Alex, stop!" she yelled, her voice cutting through the loud music, surprising everyone. He braked sharply, his body leaning forward, startled by the sudden interruption. "Your chain is loose. It could be dangerous," Karine explained, her voice trembling slightly, but with undeniable urgency. She moved quickly towards him, her hands shaking slightly, but firm, adjusting the chain with an agility born of experience and desperation. He thanked her, not understanding the true extent of the danger he had just avoided. "Thanks, Professor. I almost fell," he said, out of breath. Karine forced a smile, her heart pounding in her chest, relieved, but also exhausted. It was the first time she had been able to intervene, to change the course of a predetermined accident. But how long could she defy fate? After class, in the teacher's lounge, the smell of bitter coffee and old paper hung in the air. Karine tried to explain her concerns to John, 45, the gym manager, a skeptical and pragmatic man with a rigid posture and a look that conveyed little patience for daydreams. "John, I know it sounds crazy, and I wouldn't expect you to believe me, but I feel like something terrible is happening. Our students are dying in very strange ways, and I've had visions." John frowned, adjusting his glasses on the bridge of his nose, his chin raised. "Karine, I understand your concern, and it's natural for you to be shaken by the losses, but accidents happen. It's a big gym. We have hundreds of students, and unfortunately, life is unpredictable." He slapped the table with his palm, a gesture that denoted finality. "We can't let ourselves be carried away by superstitions or by things we can't prove. Focus on equipment safety, that's what matters." Karine took a deep breath, the smell of bitter coffee seeming to suffocate her. She knew he wouldn't understand, that his rational logic wouldn't grasp the dark truth she felt. The feeling of being alone in this fight against an invisible force was overwhelming, and the web of fate seemed to tighten around her. The following days were a constant battle for Karine, an exhausting struggle against anxiety and a feeling of powerlessness. She spent hours at the gym, her restless eyes scanning every corner, observing every movement of her students, checking equipment with obsessive meticulousness, trying to predict the unpredictable. The smell of metal, rubber, and sweat, once familiar and comforting, now exuded an air of menace, a constant reminder of the danger that seemed to lurk in every shadow. Every laugh, every clanging sound of weights, every drop of sweat seemed to carry an ominous premonition. During a weightlifting session, her eyes fixed on a young man, David, 25, a university student with a passion for bodybuilding. He was preparing to lift a weight that seemed far beyond his capacity. The bar trembled in his hands, and Karine felt the air vibrate with tension, as if space itself was bending under the force of gravity. The image from the premonition in the mirror, the falling bar, merged with the scene before her, creating a terrifying blur in her vision. "David, be careful!" she yelled, her voice hoarse, running towards him with surprising speed. At the same instant, the bar slipped from the young man's hands, who had underestimated his own strength. For a split second, time stood still. The heavy, deadly iron bar fell with a deafening crash, almost hitting his foot. David, startled and pale, dropped the weight with a thud that echoed throughout the gym. "Professor, I almost broke my foot," he exclaimed, his voice choked with fright. Karine merely nodded, her legs weak, her heart pounding frantically. It was the second time she had been able to intervene, the second life she had saved. But the relief was fleeting. The feeling that she was fighting against an invisible force, a relentless fate, grew stronger, and weariness began to settle in her soul. John, the manager, had started to notice her, and not in a positive way. His eyes, once merely curious, now followed Karine with growing suspicion as she moved around the gym. He approached her in the hallway, the fluorescent ceiling light reflecting off his glasses, creating a dazzling glare. "Karine, you're acting strangely," he said, his voice low but firm. "You've been checking all the equipment, talking to students in a peculiar way. If there's a problem, notify maintenance. Don't act like a detective." He looked at her with skepticism that bordered on irritation. "Is everything really okay? You look exhausted." Karine tried to remain calm, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, John, I'm just being more careful. I want to ensure everyone's safety, especially with what's been happening." She knew he wouldn't believe her visions, and the loneliness weighed on her shoulders, a burden heavier than any weight in the gym. That night, in her apartment, Karine felt an overwhelming exhaustion, a weight that seemed to crush her bones. The silence was broken only by the monotonous ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant barking of a neighbor's dog. She called her best friend, Lisa, 30, a psychologist in San Francisco, seeking refuge, a friendly voice. "Lisa, I need help. I think I'm going crazy," she confessed, her voice choked with tears. Lisa, with her calm and comforting voice, listened patiently, without judgment. "Karine, you're under a lot of stress. Maybe it would be good for you to take a few days off. Come here. You need to rest." Karine sighed, a sound of despair. How could she explain the premonition, the invisible web of fate, to someone who wasn't experiencing it? The scent of jasmine from the scented candle she had lit couldn't mask the smell of danger that seemed to permeate her, a smell of metal and death that refused to go away. Karine delved into exhaustive research on gym accidents, searching for patterns, coincidences, anything that could make sense of the chaos. She spent her nights at her laptop in the living room, the cold glow of the screen illuminating her pale, tired face. Strong coffee was her only companion, the bitterness of the liquid contrasting with the sweet, illusory taste of hope she still tried to hold on to. She noticed a strange and unsettling increase in similar accidents at other gyms across the country, all with a common pattern: equipment failure or human error culminating in brutal deaths. It seemed like a silent epidemic, an invisible web extending beyond the walls of Gold's Gym in Venice Beach, reaching other cities, other states. One morning, while reviewing a new student's training plan, Thomas, 35, a former football player with an imposing physical build and iron determination, she noticed a disturbing detail. He had scheduled a heavy leg workout, focusing on free squats. At the same time, Karine had her premonition in the locker room, the same time the Olympic bar appeared in her reflection. An icy sensation settled in her stomach, a foreboding that made her tremble. The weight bar in her vision ... Was it for him? The smell of sweat and rubber in the gym, which was once just part of the environment, seemed more intense, oppressive, almost suffocating, as if the air was saturated with fear. On the day of Thomas's workout, Karine was especially attentive, every fiber of her being on high alert. Her eyes followed his every movement, every muscle contraction, every breath. Sweat streamed down the athlete's face. The clanging of weights echoed in the air, a sound like a clock marking time. Thomas prepared for a free squat with an impressive load, challenging his own limits. Karine felt the air thin, the pressure in her chest increasing. She saw the image, clear as crystal, sharp as a photograph. The bar slipping from his hands, crushing him under its weight. "Thomas, stop!" she yelled, her voice cutting through the air, her heart pounding frantically, almost leaping from her chest. He stopped, startled, the weight suspended on his shoulders, an expression of surprise on his face. "Is everything okay, Professor?" he asked, out of breath. Karine ran to him, her hands trembling slightly as she held the bar to stabilize it. "It's not safe. Reduce the load. Your posture isn't correct. You could get seriously hurt," she said, her voice hoarse with emotion and fear. Thomas, reluctant but trusting his instructor's experience, complied. He didn't know that Karine had just saved him from certain death, that she had once again defied fate. The relief was momentary, a fleeting breath amidst the storm. She knew she couldn't save them forever, that she couldn't fight against such an implacable force. Fate seemed to tighten its grip, and the echo of the lost lives resonated in her mind. Karine's phone alarm rang incessantly at 5 a.m., a shrill sound that seemed to echo in her head. The sky was still dark over Santa Monica, tinted only with a faint blue-gray hue on the horizon. She got out of bed, her eyes heavy with fatigue, her mind clouded by lack of sleep. The premonition wouldn't let her rest, haunting her dreams and invading her waking hours. She felt her own death approaching, a cold and inevitable shadow. The vision of the bar falling towards her in the mirror replayed in her mind like a looping film, each time more vivid, more real. In the gym's empty, silent locker room, she saw her reflection in the mirror. The environment, once a sanctuary, now felt like the setting of a nightmare. The mirror, once frightening, now seemed a silent observer, a portal to a dimension where time and reality distorted. She felt like a pawn in a macabre game, where the gym was the board and fate, the invisible player, moving its pieces with cruel precision. The smell of cleanliness, of disinfectant and soap, still lingered in the air, a bizarre contrast to the sense of imminent death. Karine grabbed a clean towel and began to dry her face, her movements slow and deliberate. Suddenly, she felt an intense cold, a shiver that didn't come from the air conditioning, for it was off. It was a cold that seemed to emanate from within the mirror itself, a cold that chilled her bones. The fluorescent lighting of the locker room flickered frantically, casting dancing shadows across the walls, creating an even more sinister atmosphere. And then, the mirror distorted, as if water were flowing across its surface, but there was no water. Karine's image stretched and contorted, and the Olympic bar, suspended in the air, reappeared in the reflection, right behind her, swaying menacingly. This time, it seemed more real, closer, almost palpable. The muffled clanging of the weight plates accompanied the swaying, a metallic, mournful sound, like a funeral bell announcing the end. Karine spun around abruptly, her heart racing, beating like a drum in her chest. Nothing. Only the normal reflection of the empty locker room. The lights stabilized, the air still. "You're going crazy, Karine," she murmured to herself, trying to rationalize, searching for a logical explanation for the inexplicable. But the feeling was visceral, a certainty that consumed her. The danger was no longer lurking for her students. It was now behind her, inside the gym, in her own sanctuary. She knew she had to flee, but where? Fate seemed to weave an inescapable web, and the smell of metal and death seemed to envelop her completely, a whisper of the inevitable.